Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. As part of our continued coverage of the War Within Alpha, I began to explore even more hero specs. Over the last few weeks, I've been really taking a closer look at the Paladins, particularly Retribution, since the whole new change with Wake of Ashes now proccing wings, making both Herald of the Sun and Templar a little bit more interesting to play with. But from there, I've begun to explore Holy Paladin and Protection, and recently begun to have a bit of a deeper dive at Lightsmith, which at first didn't really look like much, until I recently started to finally log all of my runs on the alpha, and the information that I got to see off of that data actually got me even a little bit excited about the hero spec, even though it's probably going to be the most controversial one out of the three. So in today's video, I want to do a full overview of the three hero specs for the Paladin, from the Templar, the Herald, and even the controversial Lightsmith. Go over each of the talents individually, and even talk about the thematics and the feeling behind each and every single hero spec, and what kind of changes they're going to introduce to the class of Paladin. If you're looking to see more class stuff on the War Within Alpha, be sure to follow this channel, as we'll be doing more class coverage in the future. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So I feel the most important thing that I have to mention about Paladin hero specs is I think a lot of them are going to be a hit or a miss with the player base. And I'm going to go over them starting over in a chronological order with the ones I explored to first, and then kind of go through the most recent one, which is the Lightsmith, that's available for both Holy as well as Protection. So starting off with the first one I got to check out, which was Templar. Templars stop at nothing to bring justice to the wicked. They call down hammers of light and unleash devastating combinations of physical and holy attacks to vanquish their enemies. This one is being shared between Protection and Retribution, but as the flavor text suggests, this hero spec is going to be super hyper aggressive. So as a Protection Paladin, you may actually not enjoy this one as much. The main ability for Templar is going to be a combo ability that's going to transform your Wake of Ashes or Eye of Tear into a Hammer of Light after it is used. Hammer of Light is a new finisher move that consumes holy power that's going to deal a ton of holy damage to the primary target and some offset holy damage onto 4 nearby foes. Additionally, the hammer also calls down Empyrean hammers from the sky to strike 3 nearby foes for additional holy damage. From there on, we have talents such as Wrathful Descent, where Empyrean Hammer's crits allow 60% of that crit damage to be dealt to nearby foes. Hitting enemies by this effect will also cause enemies to deal 5% reduced damage to the Paladin. And this right here, this talent, is pretty much where majority of the defensive value comes from Templar for Protection Paladins, that 5% damage reduction. The rest of the talents are going to primarily focus on the offensive power of both Prot and Retribution Paladin. In the middle we have Shake the Heavens, where after casting Hammer of Light, you gain a buff that calls down Empyrean hammers every 2 seconds for 8 seconds. And on the left hand side, we have a choice node between Zealous Vindication, where Hammer of Light will instantly call down 2 Empyrean hammers on your target when it's cast, or a combo ability for Whom the Bell Tolls, where Divine Toll will grant you 100% increased damage to your next 3 judgments when striking only one enemy, though this amount is reduced by 20% for each additional target struck. Then we have a new choice node, which is going to be mobility focused, where Bonds of Fellowship allow you to receive 20% less damage from Blessing of Sacrifice, but each time target takes damage, you also gain movement speed up to a maximum of 40%. Conversely, you can go with Unrelenting Charger, where Divine Steed gains a few seconds of duration and your movement speed is increased by 30% additionally for the first 3 seconds. Down in the middle row, we have more of upgrade talents, with the primary one called Higher Calling, where Crusader Strike, Hammer of Wrath, and Bladed Justice extend the duration of Shake the Heavens by 1 second, and these abilities are adjusted for protection as well. On the left, we have some defensive value with Sacred Sanct Crusade. Whenever you cast Wake of Ashes or Eye of Tear's Protection, you gain Shield of Vengeance at 10% effectiveness. Some sort of defensive value, which I guess is kinda nice, but still you can see a lot of this hero spec is designed for all-out damage. Bottom right, we have Undisputed Rulings. Hammer of Light applies Judgment to your target and increases your haste by 15% for 6 seconds. Though for Protection Paladin, additionally we see Eye of Tear will now grant you 3 holy power, which further encourages a very aggressive playstyle. In the middle row we have Hammerfall, where Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory calls down Empyrean hammers on nearby foes. While Shake the Heavens is active, this effect calls down additional Empyrean hammers. On the left hand side we got another choice node with Endless Wrath, where calling down Empyrean Hammers has a 10% chance to reset the cooldown of Hammer of Wrath and make it usable on any target regardless of their health. Or vice versa, you can go with Sanctification. Casting Judgment increases the damage of your Empyrean Hammer by 10% for 10 seconds, and multiple applications of this buff may overlap. Your final capstone trait is Light's Deliverance, where you gain a stack of Light's Deliverance whenever you call down Empyrean Hammers on a target. While Eye of Tyr and Hammer of Light are both unavailable, you consume 60 stacks of Light's Deliverance to empower yourself, letting you cast Hammer of Light an additional time for free of cost. For Retribution Paladins, this means you'll simply want to play around your Wake of Ashes ability, and you'll want to make sure you have 5 Holy Power before you can use your Hammer of Light. From there on, the rotation becomes very aggressive, and that's essentially it. That's essentially the only major addition that you're going to be able to get with the Templar, besides all of the different passives that are going to greatly amplify your overall damage. For Protection Paladin, we'll be seeing a very similar structure, although instead of Wake of Ashes, you'll be using Eye of Tyr. And the ability, just like for Retribution, will also cost 5 Holy Power, which gives you a massive slam of damage that looks absolutely fantastic. But like I said earlier, defensively, you don't really have too many ways of reducing the amount of damage taken from a tank perspective. And because of this talent and the way the Templar works, Eye of Tyr essentially goes from a defensive ability for protection into one that is offensive, because you want to get the most value out of the Hammer of Light ability. So we have a very similar situation to Blood Death Knights with their Sanguine, or rather Sanlan hero spec, because it turns their defensive ability of Vampiric Blood, which you can use pretty regularly, but still as a tank, primarily you want to use your defensives defensively. You want to save them for specific situations where you're going to be taking additional damage. And in a way, you're cannibalizing that tankiness for more damage, which if you're a DPS focused paladin or you prefer doing a ton of damage, and let's say you just want to be really aggressive, this is a good playstyle. But from a strictly tank based perspective of I want to use my defenses in order to reduce damage taken, I want to maximize the reduction as best as possible, this means you will want to offset Tyr during situations where you need the defensive value. But you have Templar, which makes you want to go aggressive, while a tank should want to stay defensive. There's a bit of a friction between this defensive mindset versus a hyper-aggressive mindset. Whereas for Retribution, Templar is a fantastic option that plays around Wake of Ashes, and with the new talent that allows Wake of Ashes to proc wings every single go, Templar can gain so much value with every single use of that ability. Now after Templar, the next hero spec I've begun to explore is the Herald of the Sun. Heralds of the Sun develop a deep bond with the sun and solar energy, using it to burn down enemies and cauterize their allies' wounds. They can manifest potential solar rays while fully connected to the light. And the interesting part about Herald of the Sun, for Paladins, it's kind of like a damage over time type of a playstyle for both Holy and Retribution. As we dive into all the talents, you'll see there's a little bit more of damage over time functionality here. Starting out, we have the main ability, Dawn Light, where casting Wake of Ashes or Prism or Shield of Faith as Holy, your next 2 Holy Power spending abilities will apply Dawn Light against the target, either dealing radiant damage or radiant healing over 8 seconds. And 10% of Dawnlight's damage and healing radiates to nearby allies and enemies with a soft cap of 5 targets. And the main ability of Herald of the Sun you'll get right after is Eternal Flame, which replaces your Ward of Glory, essentially making a better version of Ward of Glory that now has a healing over time component baked in. Eternal Flame also has a benefit of healing the Paladin for 25 additional % when you cast this on yourself, giving you quite a bit of extra help. Obviously, this one ends up being kind of good for survivability for red, but not as much for damage output, where this one is going to be directly buffing Holy. The Retribution Paladins will get plenty out of Herald of the Sun in order to more than make up its value. On the right hand side, we have Luminosity, where critical strike chance of Hammer, Wrath, and Divine Storm is increased by 10%. On the opposite side, we have a choice node between Morningstar as well as Gleaming Rays. With Gleaming Rays, while Dawn Light is active, your Holy Power spenders deal 10% additional damage or healing. On the opposite side, Morningstar, every 0.5 seconds, your next Dawn Light's damage or healing is increased by 5%, stacking up to 10 times. Morningstar stacks twice as fast while out of combat, giving you a little bit of a bursty play or a bit more sustained option. And on next row we have Sun's Seer, where Hammer of Wrath and Divine Storm critical strikes cause the target to burn for additional radiant damage over 4 seconds. In the middle row we have Lingering Radiance, where Dawn Light leaves an eternal flame for 12 seconds on allies, or a greater judgment on enemies when they expire or are extended. On the opposite side we have Blessings of the An-Shi, where damage and healing over time effects, all dots and hots, have a chance to increase the damage of your next Hammer of Wrath by 200% and make it usable on any target regardless of health. Immediately as a Retribution Paladin, you're probably thinking about damage over time components of things such as Expurgation and maybe investing more into Blades of Justice, or possibly, and this could be a controversial option, not going Crusader Strike and instead going for Templar Strikes, where the second strike of Templar Strikes has a damage over time component included. Things like your Consecration also end up being one of those abilities you would think of in order to maximize the value of this talent. And this creates an interesting synergy where you are more damage over time focused as a Herald of the Sun, which is quite different and not something a lot of Paladins think of their class as that. Next we have another choice center between Will of the Dawn, where your movement speed is increased by 5% while above 80% health. Though when your health drops to a critical condition, your movement speed is increased by 40% for 5 seconds, though this effect cannot occur more than once every 60 seconds. On the choice note we have Illuminate, where Dawn Light reduces the movement speed of enemies by 50% and increases the movement speed of allies by 20%. In the next row we have Second Sunrise, where Divine Storm and Hammer of Wrath have a 15% chance to cast again at 30% effectiveness. Next up we have Solar Grace, where your haste is increased by 4% for 12 seconds each time you apply Dawnlight, where multiple stacks of this buff may overlap. Next one we have Aurora, whenever you cast your Wake of Ashes or the abilities activated by Holy Paladin, Beam Prism, and Shield of Faith, you gain Divine Purpose, where Divine Purpose is exactly as Divine Purpose is. Holy Power abilities have a 10% chance to make your next Holy Power ability free, and this essentially makes your next Holy Power ability free immediately upon use, which as a Retribution Paladin should let you stack up Dawnlight fairly easily. Before we go over Capstone, however, I did want to double back for Holy to show you how these talents are a little bit different for Holy specifically. Like with Luminosity, critical strike chance of your Holy Shock and Light of Dawn is increased by 10%. Sun's Seer causes Holy Shock and Light of Dawn critical strikes to also heal the target for additional healing over time. And with Second Sunrise, Light of Dawn and Holy Shock have a 50% chance to be cast again at 30% effectiveness. And for the capstone choice, we have Sun's Avatar. During Avenging Wrath, you become linked to your Dawnlights, causing radiant damage to enemies or healing to allies that pass through the beams. This damage and healing is reduced beyond 5 targets. Activating Avenging Wrath also applies 4 Dawnlights onto nearby allies or enemies and increases Dawnlight's duration by 25%. And this is the talent that kind of literally links all of these other talents together. And the way that the Herald of the Sun is going to play for Retribution and Holy is going to be quite different. For Retribution, you are encouraged to use damage over time abilities, though it's still hard to tell if that is going to be your potential builds going forward. It's just something I've been experimenting with. Though the change to the Paladins, where now you can use Wake of Ashes to immediately activate Wings, and having your Wings play around Wake makes Herald of the Sun a little bit more friendly and usable. Instead of having to wait an entire minute to get a lot of value out of Herald, you can just use Wake of Ashes and random procs of Wings in order to get the most amount of benefits of Herald of the Sun. A very simple setup for Retribution that I think ends up kind of working out well and could potentially be good if the damage is tuned correctly. Where Herald, however, I found more interesting is for Holy specifically. The Eternal Flame and Dawnbringer combo gives you quite a bit of healing over time, which I actually enjoyed on a Holy Paladin. Because normally the class is all about burst healing and spot healing your allies, but having to heal over time on top of it, I feel like worked pretty well. And all these healing over time effects, at least when we're scaled to level 80, seem to do quite a significant amount of overall healing. Sun's Avatar in particular, when you pop Wings, you're linked to your allies, was surprisingly really good. The amount of group-wide healing it could do, especially in group enemy situations, but also the damage it could do at the same time, was a good bit amount. And was actually very surprising to see just how effective it was, which made me think that of course it would make Retribution Paladins play around the shorter cooldown of Wings, because that one makes the most sense. Though for Holy, you are still stuck to play around the 2-minute Wings for the most part. That is, however, if there's any opportunity for a Battle Paladin to make a return with Avenging Crusader. which gives you a minute cooldown of your wings given a 12-second duration, making you play a more damage to heal your allies type of playstyle rather than the OG playstyle that most people know and love. But potentially, Avenging Crusader plus together with Awakening could give you more wings windows in order to get the most benefit out of Sun's avatar. It's hard to say if that is going to be the play going forward, but there's some potential there either way, and Herald of the Sun, if anything, opens some new doors for new opportunities and other builds to shine and flourish. Overall, I liked Herald of the Sun quite a bit for Retribution and Holy. I feel like this one is very flavorful, and the little rotational adjustments that it offers I feel like are quite noticeable when it comes to the full package of the hero spec, both its thematics but also the gameplay changes and elements. And with that being said, I lastly want to move on to Lightsmith. Lightsmiths have developed such masterful control over the light that they're able to wield it tangibly, employing constructs to empower their weapons and defenses and to protect their allies. This hero spec is shared between Protection and Holy, and it's very much a party support and group support type of spec that is gonna be controversial. Some of you guys are gonna love it and some are really going to dislike Lightsmith. I think the problem with Lightsmith is because when it comes to gameplay, whereas the Templar Paladin has massive hammers flying from the sky, so you have that visual enjoyment out of it, and Herald of the Sun can link them to their allies, and there's healing over time components and some actual additional changes, Lightsmith does not have any visible or changes that you really feel in the moment type of gameplay. Lightsmith is primarily about buffing your allies with holy armaments. With these armaments, you're able to coalesce armaments on your allies to protect them with a bulwark, providing them with a actually fairly sizable shield, or grant them sacred weapons to give them a chance for their spells and abilities to do either more additional holy damage or healing. And you have 2 charges of holy armaments, so you can keep arming your allies pretty regularly. But for the most part, you don't feel these armaments. They're just a buff that you throw out. There's not enough visual splendor to it. There's not enough like thematic aspects of it. But numerically, however, this actually might be a very, very solid hero spec, and that is going to be the part that's going to be very divisive, where in terms of feel, in terms of gameplay, you don't really feel the Lightsmith, but numbers wise after a fight you probably see a lot of benefits of Lightsmith. But it's also kind of like a support playstyle similar to that of an evoker, at least it's kind of what it evokes in you when you play it. And I think that also on that same front either is going to make people love it or absolutely dislike it. To get through all of our Paladin talents, for the most part, Lightsmiths are focused on empowering themselves or augmenting their abilities or helping find ways to buff up their allies with these weapons, the swords and the shields. So on the bottom right hand side, we have new ways to augment the Paladin. With Blessed Assurance, casting Holy Power Spenders increases the damage and healing of your next Crusader strike. Or Holy Power Spenders instead can increase your next Consecration to do additional damage or healing split across all enemies and allies with a maximum total. In the middle, we have Solidarity, where if you grant allies armaments, which for the most part you should be giving your allies buffs instead of yourself, whenever they get a benefit, you also get the benefit. So if you have a shield, you want to drop it on a tank, so you also get a shield. If you have a sword, give it to your DPS, so you also get the sword as well. The Paladin will also get benefit from the Lightsmith abilities, no matter who they grant it to. Further on, Paladins can further modify their abilities, specifically the weapons with imbues. Very similar to how Shamans can imbue the weapons with fire or wind fury, Paladins can now imbue the weapons with the right of a duration. You imbue a weapon with the power of light, increasing your stamina by 3%, causing your Holy Power Spenders to sometimes unleash a burst of healing around the target. Or imbue it with Rite of Sanctification, where the weapon imbue is going to increase your armor by 5% and primary stats by 1%. Further down, we have Excoriation, where enemies within 8 yards of Hammer of Justice are slowed by 15% for 5 seconds, or instead you can go with Fear No Evil. While wielding an armament, duration of fear effects is reduced by 50%. In the middle, we have a choice node between either faster cooldown reduction for your holy armaments, or your spells and abilities have a chance to manifest holy armament for a nearby ally, kind of at random. Laying down arms gives you an opportunity where armaments, once they fade from you, the cooldown of lay on hands is reduced by 15 seconds, making lay on hands a much more regularly used ability, and you gain Shining Light and Infusional Light when your armaments end. Hammer and Anvil allows Judgment critical strikes to cause a shockwave around the target, dealing additional damage and healing to the target's location. with Valiance, consuming Shining Light or Infusional Light extends the duration of any active armaments by 3 seconds, or reduces the cooldown by 3 seconds if none exist. Shared Resolve allows any effect of your aura to be increased by 33% on targets with your armaments, so arming and DPS with a sword makes Devotion Aura slightly better on that player. And your final ability, which is going to be a big one, primarily for the damage purposes, is Blessings of the Forge. Avenging Wrath summons an additional sacred weapon to one of your allies. During Avenging Wrath, your sacred weapons cast spells on the target echo the effects of your holy power spenders, which again allows paladins to benefit from wings. The more swords you have out and about, the more weapons you have that can copy your holy power spending abilities, whether it is to help your allies or to deal damage to your foes. Now, when it comes to gameplay of Lightsmith, you don't really, like I said, see a lot of noticeable changes in gameplay. You don't see flashy animations. You do have your paladin tossing swords and shields to your allies, but for the most part, that's really it. Your rotation doesn't necessarily change too drastically. But shields themselves, the actual holy bulwark out of all the two weapons, is actually quite notable when it comes to the numbers post-encounter. The shield itself keeps refreshing on its own for its full duration, granting an ally 50% of the max health as a shield, and then gaining 5 additional % every 2 seconds up to a maximum of 30%. And if you play with a very tanky tank class that has a lot of self-survivability, for the most part I imagine Holy Bulwark should be enough to keep him alive through a good portion of encounters. Right now, dungeons aren't really focused super well in terms of having tanks take a huge amount of damage, so for the most part I can just place a Holy Bulwark on a tank and then forget about him entirely as long as your shield stands, and the amount of damage he can absorb, I don't need to heal any of that. So the shield itself is actually quite a valuable tool, but I can't say as much about the sacred weapon. It does a decent bit of holy damage and healing. It might still be a little undertuned right now in the alpha because numbers are not final by any measure. The sacred weapons, if you can get a bunch of them, together with Blessing of the Forge inside of wings, does provide you a considerable bit of damage or healing, which again may force paladins, or may rather encourage paladins, to play for shorter wings cooldown, so they can use them more often to get more benefits out of Lightsmith. So I honestly feels like Holy Paladins may actually end up playing Battle Paladin at some point. You just have so much value around wings that it seems like using wings more often will probably give you more benefits. Though with that being said, that's about all I could say about Lightsmith. Surprisingly, it actually does a bit of decent healing, at least for Holy, but in terms of the playstyle, in terms of what we've seen with other hero specs, this one is going to be divisive. Thematically, it just doesn't quite feel the same way as a Templar, or doesn't feel as flashy as Herald, but it still has potential, which gives me hope behind Lightsmith hero spec in general. But I really do wish it had a little bit more flashier animations behind all these weapons. Maybe like making your allies' weapons glow, or giving them a shield that sits on the arm that constantly glows whenever they do have an actual shield on them. Something that makes you feel like you're running with a Lightsmith Paladin. But for the most part, I actually thought I would enjoy this one a lot less than others, but I think this one actually is not that bad. It's one of those that you definitely need to try to see for yourself if you enjoy it or not. I gave Lightsmith a go, and actually didn't hate it at all. I actually, in fact, even liked it a little bit. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think. It all matters what you guys think in the comments down below. What do you think about every single one of these Paladin hero specs? Let me know in the comments. What are your thoughts on the Templar? Do you like just how flashy it is and how fun it is? But also, as a protection paladin, do you think it maybe is too aggressive and not defensive enough? As a holy or red paladin, what are your thoughts on the Herald of the Sun? And would you potentially go for shorter cooldown CD just to get the most benefit out of this one? Also, what are your thoughts on Lightsmith? Love it? Hate it? Would you actually play it? Let me know all of those thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video, or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.